Hello, CFA candidates. Just want to share some strategies with you that have been proven to be very effective in preparation for level 2. And what we do usually is we concentrate on the practice questions towards the end of our prep program, and that's a perfect segue over to the exam because you've done so many questions leading into the exam that you've got this awesome momentum behind you going in. Nevertheless, I want to share some things that you should keep in mind before you embark on the practice questions that we have assigned. First of all, before you begin to attempt the assigned questions, make sure that you've made a set of summary notes for all the LOSs. So my philosophy is that by writing a little something down for each LOS, it helps you to understand the material, but more importantly, it'll help you retain the material. See, if you read something, you may not recall it at a later date, but when you write a little something down for that concept, because of that muscle memory, it's a lot easier to recall it at a later date. So they call it the link between the pen and the brain. Big believer in that. Now, your notes by far will be the most important element in your preparation. It is the foundation from which you'll be able to answer most of the questions. And that's the key word that I want to use, ladies and gentlemen, is foundation. So when you have those set of summary notes that you've put together, that's like the foundation of a building. So if you have a solid foundation, you can have a solid building on top. But if you have a weak foundation, I don't care how many practice questions you do, it's not going to be very successful because that foundation just isn't there. Note 2, all the questions on this list are from the CFA curriculum, which is the exact source that the examiners will be using in formulating the exam questions. The CFA Institute has made it very clear that the exam will be based on the content from the curriculum. So our philosophy is, why don't we just master the same source that the examiners will be using? However, not all the questions in the CFA curriculum are being assigned. Instead, this list only contains questions that have a high return on time. Let me draw an analogy. Suppose there are 10,000 stocks that are out there. In reality, there's more stocks that are available. So are you telling me you're going to put a little money in each of those 10,000 stocks? Is that how it works? Is that how investing works? Is that why you want your CFA designation, so that you just buy a little bit of everything? Or would you do your analysis and only pick the stocks that's going to yield you the highest return? It's the exact same concept here. There's thousands of questions available. So you have to ask yourself, for every hour I put into these questions, how much value am I getting out of it? And not all questions have the same return on time. So for example, there are some blue box questions. It'll take you about an hour just to get through it and do all those answers. But within that hour, you could have done 10 other questions and got even more points with that hour invested. And that's the philosophy we use here. We don't treat all questions the same. We know some questions have more high value than others. So our goal is to ensure that candidate gets the most point for each hour that's invested in doing practice questions. The questions on this list are either directly related to an LOS, so that's the first criteria. So if the question matches an LOS, it's considered as high priority. And I'll give you an example. Some chapters have a lot of formulas and a lot of computation. But then when you look at the LOSs, which is what the exam questions are based on, none of the LOSs ask you to compute or calculate. So why are you doing that extensive calculation question if you're not required to calculate it? Wouldn't your time be better spent on doing questions that are more examinable, i.e. related to an LOS? And that's the way we think. Now, the other criteria is the question has to be bite-sized, because we know that, not all questions fit an exam format. So for example, they're not going to give you a whole bunch of financial statements like top to bottom just to answer one question. So in the book, they might have that, but we just know on the CFA exam, you have such little time to answer these questions. We just know a question like that cannot be formatted for an exam. So those are our two criteria. For a question to be considered as high priority and therefore included in this list, it must directly comply with an LOS and it must be bite-sized. In other words, it could be fitted into an exam. Any in-chapter example or end-of-chapter question that is not on this list should not be attempted. So these excluded questions are the opposite of the inclusive criteria. For example, it's not related to an LOS, or they're too comprehensive to be tested on the CFA exam. Note 3. What you should do is you should review your LOS notes for a chapter and then attempt the examples and questions that are assigned on this list for that chapter. And you would repeat the cycle on a chapter by chapter basis. So let me skip ahead for a little bit. It's just on page 2 because that's where the assigned questions begin from. So here we go. The first chapter for which we've assigned questions is chapter 1, which is Introduction to Linear Regression. So here's what I'm recommending. First, you review your LOS notes for chapter 1. Just quickly, like half an hour, you just go through all the notes you've made for that chapter. And then you do these assigned questions right here. And the reason for that is because, your LOS notes covers the concept, whereas the questions are the application of those concepts. So by reviewing and then doing the questions, you bring everything together. And then you repeat this cycle for reading 2. You review your LOS notes for reading 2. Again, half an hour just going over your notes. Remember, we said make summary notes for each of the LOSs. And then you do the questions that are assigned for that chapter. And again, this brings everything together. Recommended. You should flag the examples and questions that you may want to revisit at a later date. Furthermore, in the event that a chapter does not have any assigned questions, you should still review your LOS notes for that particular chapter before moving on to the next one. So this has got 2 parts in there. Let me just elaborate quickly. We have one standing rule, and that standing rule is to never get stuck. Never. So if a question gives you a hard time, flag it. I'll give you a demonstration. Suppose I'm doing a question, and for a whole minute, nothing's happening. I'm trying, it's just not taking off. Done. My internal clock kicks in and says, that's it. Red flag, move on. So what I'll do is I'll flag the question and then just go on to the other questions. And I'll give you a demonstration. So here we are, the assigned questions. Suppose I'm working on question 17. And like I said, after a minute or 2, it's just not sinking in. I'll just flag it. I've circled it. And then I'll move on. I'll do the other questions, go down, down, down. And then once I've completed all the questions from the curriculum, guess what questions I'm going to come back to? The ones that I have flagged. And you'd be amazed how things will click the second time around when you come back to it. The point of this strategy is you always keep moving forward. I mean, you have so many questions to get through. You do not have the luxury of getting stuck on a question. So once again, if you're stuck, circle it, i.e. flag it, and just move on to the next one, and then you'll come back to it. And of course, I am your safety net. So if it's still not sinking in, you send me an email, boom, boom, boom. I'll give you an answer back. I'll know exactly where you're stuck, and that's it. You're fixed, move on. Again, this philosophy, just keep moving forward. Now, as I've been alluding to, never get stuck. Go immediately to the solution if a question gives you any difficulty. This will ensure you don't waste too much time on any one particular question, thus freeing you up to cover as many questions as possible. What counts is not whether you're able to get a practice question right the first time you attempt it, but whether you'll be able to get a similar question correct on the exam. Let me show you the difference between a rookie and a veteran. A rookie thinks that I got to get this right the first time or else I'm not as smart as I thought. That's rookie thinking. Professionals don't think like that. Professionals know, and I love this about professionals, that the only day that counts is the championship game. That's the only day that counts for them. So if they're dropping the ball during practice, they couldn't care less because their mind is already on the championship game. They know that's the only day that counts. But this philosophy of, I got to get it right, you'll never get through all the questions because now you're spending, instead of spending 5 minutes on a question, now you're spending 10, 15 minutes on the question because you got to get it right. That is dumb. And I'm trying to use the most polite term that's coming to my mind out of the set of terms that are swimming in my head right now because I see it and it's sad because I know that's going to be the kiss of death when a candidate thinks, I got to get it right the first time I do it. It's all about philosophy, ladies and gentlemen. Number 5, to avoid burnout, make one weekday each week a non-CFA day. Every other day, though, be sure to attempt as many practice questions as possible. Every hour of prep is going to count. The average prep time now should be increased to at least 20 hours per week. So there's a lot of stuff in here. Let's break it down. You got to have one weekday that's non-CFA because you got to stay fresh. You don't want to burn out. So there's a little bit of biology in this. Okay. The other thing is, in this last phase, remember I said practice question becomes our concentration during the last part of our prep. So that means you're weeks, 8 to 10 weeks away from the exam. Within that period, that's like playoff season. So you got to up your hours. You got to put in those extra hours. So if during the regular season, you're putting in 15 hours a week on average, during the last 8 to 10 weeks, minimum. And that's why I've said at least. You got to be putting in at least 20 hours per week. Let's see how dedicated you are, right? How can I expect you? So obviously, you guys want to work on finance, right? How can I expect you to be working on a report late at night if you're shying away from putting in many, many hours? This is like your sandbox. This is your sandbox. This is where you play to develop the skills for when you actually get into that career that you want. Putting in hours should be nothing for you. And this is where you develop that comfort with these many hours. Don't shy away from it. Remember why you're doing this. I'm going to remind you, because you love finance. Nobody pushed you into this. You came here because you love finance. It's like a bucket of ice cream, bucket of your favorite ice cream in front of you. Knock yourself out. Put in those big hours. Note 6. Do not worry about speed or grade when attempting these practice questions. Both speed and grade will improve naturally as you attempt more questions. For now, just focus on understanding the concept that underlies each question. And that's the other rookie mistake, ladies and gentlemen. Remember I said rookies, they got to get everything right the first time, right? Because they're insecure, No. It's these things like speed and grade, they improve over time. So don't keep track of it early on. It's more important that you understand the underlying concept. Note 7, you're strongly encouraged not to use third-party Q banks. The CFA examiners will only be drawing questions from the curriculum, which is where the assigned questions below are from. This one I don't get, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has to explain to me why people go to Q banks when the CFA Institute has made it so clear over and over again that the exam will be straight out of the curriculum. Isn't it better just to master the curriculum? I'd rather candidates do curriculum questions 3 times over than to do 3 external Q banks in addition to the curriculum. They've given you their game plan. It's like you have your enemy's game plan in front of you. So why use someone else's guess? That's what a third party is. Someone sitting there is trying to guess what might be tested. You want to base your prep on someone else's guess, right? So concentrate on these curriculum questions, which is where we're assigning these questions from. Note 8, attempt the questions in the order of the readings that are presented below. Since the list starts off with the more quant-heavy chapters, you may find progress to be relatively slow in the beginning. So quants, right? It's just going to take you a little longer to get through those questions. That's to be expected. One thing you don't want to do is you don't want to sort of say, I got to do 1 chapter a day. That's never going to work because as I demonstrated here, some chapters require more work than others. Instead, what you should do if you're doing a weekly schedule is you should just say, I got to put in 20 hours this week. Doesn't matter how much I cover, I just got to put in my 20 hours. Because this gives you that flexibility. Some weeks you'll cover more, some weeks you'll cover less chapters. But if you put in 20 hours per week for that 8 to 10 week period leading to the exam, I know you'll get through all the assigned questions. At the same time, I've seen what happens to candidates when they show me this rigid schedule. I kid you not, like they have this schedule and it's so comprehensive. Like on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they're going to cover quants, and the Friday, Saturday up to 6 o'clock in the evening, they're going to cover that chapter. They had it down to the hour. That is insane. That's not how it works. If a plan is too rigid, it's going to crack. Instead, this 20-hour per week thing gives you flexibility because you're not keeping track of how many chapters. But like I said, I know from experience that if you put 20 hours per week for that 8 to 10 week period, plus with the final week off work, you'll get through everything you need to. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the item sets here. So for level 2, of course, you're going to have these item set questions. Now, each case is effectively a compilation of set of independent issues, which is often presented in the same order as the questions that follow. Let me give you a demonstration. So you'll have your case, let's say around 4 paragraphs, and then right underneath you'll have 4 questions. So here's the way you should approach it. Read the first item set question and then proceed to read the case until you come across the section corresponding to the requirements of that question. So if I'm seeing this for the first time, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read this question first, question 1. I want to see what they want. And then what I'll do is I'll start reading the case. And usually the case is ordered in the same way as the question. So the first paragraph corresponds with the first question. So I'll read the contents of the first paragraph, and then I'll come back to question 1, and I'll answer, let's say, B. So then what we'll do is, so after solving the first question, you read the requirements of the next question, and then resume again your progression through the case until you solve that question. So then what I'll do is, so once question A is solved, I'll read the requirements of question 2. And then I'll start resuming the case where I left off, which is like the second paragraph. And all the information will be there. And then I'll come back to question 2 and I'll say, okay, I'm going to answer C. And then the same thing. You read question 3. After reading question 3, you go to the third paragraph, you look at the material, and then you come back to question 3 and you answer it. And you just keep repeating that cycle. So even though it's referred to as a case, if you look at these questions, after you're looking at a few of these questions, you'll see the pattern. They're just independent questions that have just been put together. The only thing that's common is that junior analyst. They always have a junior analyst in these cases, right? It's that same junior analyst, but he's talking to like different, once he's talking to the portfolio manager, then he's talking to his client, et cetera, et cetera. But they're completely different topics. So repeat the cycle until all questions are answered. Consequently, instead of tackling the case as a whole, you'll be breaking that into pieces and addressing each question individually. Furthermore, since the questions are independent of each other, the outcomes from a preceding question have no impact on the outcome on a subsequent question. Ladies and gentlemen, just very quickly, let me wrap this up for you. The examples and questions that are in red have pass max solutions available. Let me show you what I mean. So here's the first chapter, Introduction to Linear Regression. So that's the first chapter on our assigned list. And at the bottom of that chapter module, you'll see the practice questions. So if you click that, and there they are. So these are the same set of questions that are included on the list, right? It's just that the list I was showing you was just a summary of the assigned questions from all the chapters. And what I've done is, for the questions that are bolded in red, I've posted my own set of solutions for them. What's the difference between the book solutions and my solutions? The book relies on formulas quite a bit. I use a ground-up approach. And I encourage you, so wherever you see a question that's bolded in red, I encourage you to look at the solutions that I posted, because it requires less memorization. So when you build something from the ground up, you don't have to memorize a formula. But more importantly, when you see it going step by step, you actually understand what the process is. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. The closer you stick to this game plan, the better your chances will be on exam day. Thank you.